And it's actually Father James is really instrumental in my coming out. Because I remember Father James telling me, you have to be who you are. And I'm sorry the church is not ready for you. And you probably will need to find another type of religion because you're a deeply spiritual person. And I'm sorry that the church is not ready for you. But I think God wants you to be the whole of who you are.
Hi, hello, hi. My name is Kay Anderson, and this is Lost Spaces, the podcast that is all about lost queer spaces. Only it's not just about that. It is about the memories of the people who drank there and danced there and fell in love there. Every week I talk to a different person and I find out what relationship they had with a particular queer space and how it helped to shape the person that they've become. So the main hook to the Cheers theme song, I don't know why I'm bringing up the Cheers theme song, but here we are. The main hook to that chorus is, sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. And whilst I think that's true, whilst I think sometimes it's amazing to show up somewhere and for everyone to be familiar with you and everyone to be like, hey, how you been doing? I also think the opposite is true. And I think sometimes it's so fantastic to go where nobody knows your name and nobody knows who the hell you are and nobody is looking at you when you walk through the front door. And it's that type of space that we're talking about on this week's episode. My guest for this show is the scholar, therapist, and host of the Gender Studies podcast, Alex Iantaffi, who takes us back to the 1990s when they plucked up the courage to catch the train into central London, find a corner seat in the First Out Cafe, which was on Tottenham Court Road, and started to observe and figure out and take those tentative, delicious, confusing, terrifying first steps into embracing their queerness. But before we get into that, I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you are enjoying this podcast, it would make a huge difference to me if you could take a few minutes to leave a review or a rating on your podcast app. So you might be listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Pocket Casts or some other app. But if you could just take a few minutes to fill in the review function on there and share your thoughts on the show, that would be super helpful to enable other people to find the show and understand what it's about. And in turn, that will help me to keep on making the show. Right, why don't we find out about Alex's story? So let's go back in time to 1997.
Yes.
I think the Spice Girls were ruling the world.
The Spice Girls were ruling the world.
This is how I measure time, like before Spice Girls, after Spice Girls, during Spice Girls. Anyway, so this is during Spice Girls. 97, you land in London. What's your plan?
So I actually was living in Reading in the UK, but close enough to London that I could escape to London whenever I needed to get out of town. It's a short train ride from Reading to London. And I had moved to the UK in 1993, but I was coming out in 1997.
Oh, okay. So I've got all my details wrong already, and we've only
That's
just
okay.
started.
It can only go uphill from here. Let's look at it that way.
So 93, you arrive in the UK, you move to Reading, and 97 is when you start coming out. Mm-hmm. What are the seeds and what are the signs and what's the path towards coming out?
Oh, wow. What a good question. I mean, at least my first coming out, right? And
there's been like 17 since then, or how many do we need to keep track of?
Oh my God, I've lost count. We don't keep track of those anymore. I'm too old to keep track of all the coming outs. At least 17. So 93, I'm 22. I moved to the UK from Italy, and it's saying it's a culture shock. I think it's an understatement for me as a Southern Italian.
So what was the weirdest British thing then that you
Oh my God.
remember?
Two things: the amount of drinking, which was terrifying for me. I was also very, I was brought up in a really interesting household. I was very Catholic, but my dad was like a card carrying communist and labor organizer. So I had a lot of kind of community organizing, political values, and kind of the more radical side of like Catholicism, like liberation theology, all of that. But I'm also this like innocent 22-year-old who's always like lived at home, with my parents or my grandma. And so I moved to the UK, and the first Friday night, I'm living in a student hall because I was on an Erasmus scholarship, which is a scholarship that was given to students in Europe at the time to go study in another European country for 6 months. And so I'm on this Erasmus scholarship to finish up my degree. I'm 22, it's Friday night. I go down to use the phone because we didn't have mobile phones yet. I'm that old, to call home. And there are students drinking at the bar, but really drinking and being really drunk and on tables. And I was so horrified that I went up to my room and locked myself in. And I was even scared to go to the bathroom because I had never seen that many people drank in one place, right? So my nervous system was like, what is happening? I don't recognize this situation. Even though I was born and brought up in Rome, which is like a metropolis, and I'm used to like people and crowds and all of that. But I'm like, I have never seen this many drunk people at once. This is next level. And it goes from like the British being like all uptight and very like proper, to just this like everything goes, right? When people drink sometimes, or at least it felt that way. So that was one of the culture shock. And then the other was the queuing. I remember being at the bus stop and there's like two people, and in Rome, it's like you're waiting for the bus stop, nobody's in a line, and then the bus arrives and you kind of just like try to get on the bus, especially if it's really full, and kind of elbow your way in, try not to get pickpocket, try not to get robbed, whatever word I'm looking for. Pickpocketed,
Yes.
Is that the right word? Yes. Because some stereotypes are true, and I have gotten pickpocketed in my own country a couple of times. So, I'm used to kind of, that's how you take the bus. And then there's two people and they're literally lining up at the bus stop. And I thought that this was a thing that I learned in books, but wasn't true. And I remember just like starting to laugh uncontrollably because I was like, oh my God, this is not just books. This is really how it works. And so for me, that was the contrast, right? This really like super uptight, people will line up at the bus stop, even if there are two folks and there's like a system and a structure for everything. And, people drank at a bar on a Friday night.
So,
yeah.
But is that the reason why people drink? Because they're so bound by rules throughout the week?
I mean, I think so, but I think that, but that's just my opinion. But I mean, I guess that's got nothing to do with my coming out.
No, but interesting perspective nonetheless. I think I need to come to the defense of queues though, because I am a big fan of queues. Don't like going to countries where there is pandemonium in every shop or getting on buses. I am a firm believer in a good queuing system.
I can see the benefits of it. I can see the benefits. I can't say that I'm always good at following the system, but I can see the benefit of a slightly more organized system, especially when it comes to buses, I have to say, having used public transport a lot in my life.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Forget about that.
So I've been in the UK for 4 years about that point. I've also gotten engaged, married, and I got divorced within a year. So yeah, there's a lot happening in those 4 years. In those 4 years, I finished my degree, I finished a postgraduate diploma in deaf studies, and I started a PhD, which I'm in the middle of in 97. Literally, I think I'm in the middle of that process at the University of Reading, get engaged, get married, get divorced, all within 4 years.
Wow. So engaged, married, divorced. This was like
Yes.
12 months, 18 months? How long?
The engagement, I can't remember. This, like, I met the person that I married like early on when I arrived in the UK, but we were on and off, and then we got engaged. I think it was about a year engagement before we got married. We got married in 96, and then we got divorced in 97. Well, I think officially the divorce came through in 98, but we separated in
Yeah,
97. And it was not a good situation. It was a intimate partner violence situation, so it wasn't good. I was young, I was naive, but it's important because in the middle of all that turmoil, I'm also starting to question my sexuality,
Yeah.
which is not something I've done much before, I have to say. But, in the mid 90s, I remember the first time I saw two people of the same gender kiss on the street in London. And they must have thought I was such a creeper because I just like paused and I was just looking and I was like, oh, that's an option. Oh, like something sparked, right? And I must have looked like such a creeper in that moment. But for me, like, neurons were like sparking up there going, ooh, something, right? But it would be quite a bit of time before from that moment to kind of weave into my coming out then in 97. And so for me, kind of there was this kind of coming into consciousness, which was also a little bit more complicated because as a bisexual person, right, I was like, well, it's not like this relationship is a lie. It's just that I think my feelings are more complicated. But, I was brought up Catholic, and that was complicated at the time to accept queerness for myself. And I hadn't even touched into my transness yet. That would come later. But it was really hard to find anybody to talk to about all those feelings. But somehow I get divorced and come out.
Well, let's just sorry, just to stop you there. This moment of, oh, that's an option. Was this a revelation because you never knew that queerness existed, or because you knew that it had existed but you'd already discounted it when you were younger?
No, I had no idea. Like, it wasn't even in my consciousness. And I have to say, I'm a little bit of a naive person too, which as part of my neurodivergence, I now understand. But there was no same gender like kissing or relationship or representation when I was growing up at all. In Italy. And now looking back, of course, there were queer people, right? But, including me, but a lot of us didn't know or had really complicated feelings because of being such a Catholic country. And so that moment for me was like, it was like when you're looking at a landscape and all of a sudden, like, it just gets bigger. You know what I mean? It just expands. And so something connected and expanded. And then I had to put all the puzzle pieces in place. And that took time. That took a long time. I think even after coming out, I was still putting puzzle pieces in place. And in a way, it would be years later when I also come out as trans that the puzzle pieces really start to settle more properly.
Do you remember, was there a moment or was there a set of moments when you were like, oh, I might be bisexual?
Oh my God, there are so many moments. I don't know that there was a moment, but I think there were many moments. And in a way, my PhD was really pivotal to my coming out process because I got a scholarship to do a PhD in women's studies.
There's a sign there straight away.
I know, right? Straight away, I was like, what am I doing? So I'm starting to immerse myself in women's studies. And part of my studentship also meant that I was teaching. And so I'm teaching, I'm learning, I'm researching, I'm really immersing myself into feminism. And at the time, it would have been second wave feminism, really.
It would have been Spice Girls feminism, wouldn't it?
It would definitely be Spice Girl feminism. Spice Girls were definitely part of that awakening. And so there are so many moments, right? There is reading all this feminist text, but also I knew that there was so much wisdom, and also second wave feminism, there was always something missing, which of course later on would be the trans piece for me, right? But it opened up all these worlds. But I also started going to women's studies conferences, and so there's dances and there's women dancing together. And I remember this women's studies conference in Wales, I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in Wales. And I was staying on somebody's floor because, right, that's what we did. We were students. And
Yeah.
so, we'd get like cheap registration, sleeping on people's floors. That's just how we rolled. And so I'm sleeping at this person's house on her floor, and I have this huge crash on the person who's hosting me, right? But I don't know what to do with it at all. Like, I'm just having all these feelings and all this like realization that, oh, I think that there is so much more to my sexuality that I've even started to explore, right? And then I'm in this very abusive relationship where I did try to start to express some of that, and it didn't go very well. There was a lot of really emotional abuse. I mean, there was physical abuse too, but there was also emotional abuse around using my Catholicism against me, right? Like, I don't think this is who you are. And because I was like, maybe we should delay the marriage. I think I'm having some feelings here that I need to explore, right? And my fiance at the time was like, you're going to lose your whole family. I'm going to tell everybody if you delay the wedding. I don't think this is real, right? And then I tried telling my best friend in Italy at the time, and she's like, I think you're just getting cold feet. And I'm like, you must be right. This is probably just cold feet. I am a feminist. I love women. It's just what it is. It's nothing to do with sexuality. Somehow I convinced myself that this is the right way to go. Obviously now I'm like, what was I thinking? But at the time, I was really, really struggling. But there are all these moments that kind of weave together for me. And then finally, funnily enough, believe it or not, is Princess Diana dying that does it for me. I think it was August 31st. And I remember because it was our wedding anniversary, actually, our 1 year wedding anniversary, 1997. I think I wake up and there's the news of what happened to Princess Diana, right? And she almost represented this like fairy tale when I was growing up, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just how it was framed from in the media. And now I'm like, I was so naive. Like, the monarchy is so problematic.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. And so here we are in the 90s. I'm 26 at this point, and I have all this weird, complicated feelings, and I'm in this abusive relationship, and I turn on the TV and there's news of her dying. And something in me just like breaks. Like, something in me is just like, life is so short, and I don't want to be treated like this in the relationship I'm in. I do want to explore who I am. I want to be free. It's just like a dumb, like, breaking, really.
Wow.
And so soon after then, I break up with my husband soon after that, which was its own terrible and complicated nightmarish scenario. And luckily I had a lot of really good friends who supported me through that and come out all at the same time. And of course, before that, there are moments like, I remember staying up late at night to watch, I think it was Dyke TV, where they would show lesbian movies late at night, right? And so I'm like, my ex-husband, my husband at the time, was in not the whatever equivalent of the National Guard in the UK. That I can't remember what it is, but it's voluntary. And anyway, they go do trainings on weekends. So whenever I would not be at home, I would stay up late to kind of watch Dyke TV and go like, is this who I really am? Call the helpline, the gay and lesbian helpline, to be like, I think I am, but I don't know. It's complicated. I don't understand my sexuality. I didn't come across bi community yet. And so I'm trying to figure out, am I lesbian? Am I not a lesbian, right? Am I bisexual? Like, what does that even mean, right? If I'm bisexual, do I even need to change anything about my life or not? So the dam breaks after Princess Diana's death, and I end my relationship, and with all the complication that entails. But there are all these moments before then, right? Like, trying to trying to find myself, trying to understand my desire, trying to understand myself, being terrified that a lot of what I was seeing fit but didn't quite fit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it was, yeah, it was complicated, if that makes sense.
Okay, but what happened with this Welsh woman?
Sadly,
Nothing. Oh,
nothing
okay.
happens.
Okay.
Just unrequited, lying there at night, going, "Oh my God, I'm having all
Oh,
those feelings. I don't even know what to do with it."
oh. But there's something quite delicious about that. There's something just really lovely about sitting with those feelings and being like, oh my God, I'm in so much torment, and being too terrified to even say.
Exactly. There's a lot of that in my first coming out. I'm in my 20s. I'm a Pisces with Cancer rising. There's a lot of feelings in here. And so
Oh,
there's a
wait.
lot
You're
of
going to have to
like,
explain that to me.
oh,
What
okay.
does Pisces with Cancer
With
rising
Cancer
mean?
rising, I'm a very watery being. I'm very watery and I'm very full of
What
feelings.
exactly is a watery person?
A watery person, as I see it, this is not going to be everybody's interpretation. It's just full of feelings, right? So I was full of feelings, full of drama. I'm in my 20s, right? Both Pisces and Cancer, we love our feelings.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's just a lot of feelings. A lot of that experience is internal for a good like couple of years before I even tell anybody.
Yeah.
There is all this process of, is this me? Is this not me? Reading, watching, trying to understand, trying to mean what it understands for me individually, but also feeling this political alignment, right, with separatist lesbian, but also not quite wanting to be a separatist lesbian, which now makes sense because of
Ah.
the trans piece, right? That was always like, it's too far, and I was like, oh, it makes sense, right? Because
Oh, so you were thinking it was too far, but you also thought that you should be a separatist lesbian.
absolutely, because down with the
Ah.
patriarchy, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh.
I know. There's a lot happening.
Oh, yeah,
It's a lot,
that's
it's
tricky.
complicated. Exactly. So I spent many haunting hours calling helplines, watching things. And then finally, when I tried to go out into the world, I tried to go to the local gay pub, which was the Wynford Arms, which is also closed down in Reading since, I believe. And I would just stand literally on the other side of the sidewalk and not being able to go in because I was so scared of going in, right? And so actually, First Out in Tottenham Court Road in London is the first gay place that I went inside and it was
Ah.
thanks to the helpline. Somebody, when I called the helpline and I was like, look, I keep trying to go to my local gay pub and I get really overwhelmed and there's a lot of people. I don't know how to do this. And they're like, oh, you're close enough to London. You could go to First Out, which is a cafe. You can go during the day. So I take my book. I can't remember which book I was reading at the time, but I'm there with my book in my bag and I go to First Out and I order my coffee and my lunch and I sit in a corner table. And finally I'm like, oh, right, this is happening.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back a step.
Yes.
So before you order your drink, before you open your book to pretend you're reading whilst also just earwigging on people next to you, describe to me the feelings and the thoughts before going through that door.
At that point, I was so ready because I've been so in my head about it, right? And I had started talking a little bit to people about it, even though I hadn't necessarily had the best reception with some folks. And so I think the thoughts are, I've got to do this. There is almost like a imperative within me, like that this is the next step. I've spent enough time thinking about it, talking about it. It was almost like this feeling moved physically to take this step, if that makes sense. I was probably also feeling a little nauseous at that point. There were just a lot of feelings. It was complicated, it was overwhelming, but it was also distance enough from where I lived and anonymous enough in
Yeah,
London
yeah.
that it didn't feel the same pressure as going into the local pub. And because it's a cafe, right? It's a cafe like any other cafe. So even just arriving and seeing the front of First House Cafe in Tottenham Court Road for the first time, it doesn't feel as intimidating, right? It's a cafe, it's during the day. I believe the first time I went, it was during the week, so it was quieter rather than on a weekend. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go in and get some lunch. I gotta eat. I have a book. I can do this, right? So there's both this like physical almost imperative to go inside, but also this ease at the same time, like this I am ready, right? Somehow I just wasn't ready before, but I am ready. I can do this. And I just go in and order my food and sit down. And here I am, you
Um,
know.
so you've sat down, you've done all of those things. How does it feel then at that point?
Relief, mostly relief. Like, oh, this is fine. Nothing bad is happening. Nothing is falling from the sky to what the word I'm looking. There's no thunder or lightning coming
Yeah.
from the sky, right, to hit me. And at that point, by the time I was sitting in First Out, I'd also talked about it to a Catholic priest back in Reading because I was part of a Bible study group. And it's actually Father James is really instrumental in my coming out because I remember Father James telling me, you have to be who you are, and I'm sorry the church is not ready for you. And you probably will need to find another type of religion because you're a deeply spiritual person. And I'm sorry that the church is not ready for you. But I think God wants you to be the whole of who you are. God
Oh,
doesn't want you to be in this awful, abusive relationship trying to be who you're not. That is not serving
well,
God.
that's a good. So that's wait. So I'm kind of
Yeah, this is the
reading.
Catholic priest.
Yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
reading this in two ways because in one way I'm like, wow, he's really supportive to you to say, oh, you should be who you are, go and explore who you are. But on the other,
Yeah.
it sounds like he's saying, and get the hell out of my church.
I mean, not his church specifically, but I think he was being really honest. And, I'd done 2 years of study at the Gregorian. I was deeply, deeply religious. I wanted to be a nun before getting married. So I was pretty serious about my Catholicism. I think it was more of a conversation of like, we both know that this is not a space where you can be expansive and love yourself as you are. And so it was more of a like, I really want you to be yourself and not be bound in this like rhetoric of, love the sinner, hate the sin kind of
Yes,
shit.
yeah.
I
Ugh.
think it was more of like, which is where the Catholic Church was and is at in a lot of ways, right? And so I didn't feel that way when I talked with him. I felt more like the sadness that there wasn't
Okay.
space for me to stay within the church, but staying within the church would not have allowed me to be
Yes.
myself.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was more of an acknowledgement and recognition of the limitation of our shared faith at that time, if that
Okay.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
That's how it felt to me.
But how incredible! Like if you had had another father, priest, would it
Yeah.
father, like you would
Priest,
have
yeah.
had a completely different advice and might have taken you
Absolutely.
many more years.
I feel very grateful. If it wasn't for Father James, it would have taken even longer. I was like 26 when I came out publicly and officially. Because
Ooh,
after,
officially. How do you do it officially?
I mean, I just told
Telegram?
everybody.
Oh,
I've
okay,
never
okay.
been exactly. I've just never been a like keep shit to myself kind of person. Oh, can we swear on your
Yes, yeah,
podcast?
yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, great. I've never been like, I can be internal in my process, but once I'm ready, I'm ready. So once I was ready, like I told everybody, everybody knew. I told my parents eventually. That was a big deal. But like I think that moment was instrumental for me. And so that had already happened by the time I was ready to walk into First Out. And so in a way, sitting in a corner table at First Out, just kind of looking around, and it was quiet,
Did
but
you order a quiche? I bet you had a quiche.
I did. It's like I probably did. That is real. And by that point, I felt like relief and this like peaceful feeling, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. And it was this peaceful feeling of, oh, I'm just a human like a lot of other humans. And it's just that the world it's not quite ready to make the space for us that needs to be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And from the way you've just said that,
Mm-hmm.
it sounded as though you had peace with that fact in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you still have peace with that fact?
Yes, and so much more so. Yeah.
How do you maintain it?
That's a good question, especially with all the anti-trans rhetoric at the moment and all of that. I I think that's something that's always been within me, and that's why I've always been so drawn to like religion and spirituality as well. Even as a young teenager, I remember sitting on the train. I think I was going to Sicily to visit my great aunts from Rome. And I was sitting on the train, and I remember this moment where I was like, looked around the carriage, and I had this moment of like, just feeling this connection with everybody who was there, even if I didn't know them, and this thought of like, wouldn't the world be so much better if we could all understand how deeply connected we all are, right? That there are all these separations and all these differences, but beyond all of those, there is just like a deep kinship between all of us and between all of us and the natural world. And that's something that I've always felt really deeply growing up, you know. But that moment, I think, for me was really instrumental. And I was a very devout Catholic, but I was a really bad Catholic because I would go around saying things like, I don't think hell exists. I think hell is just us feeling separated from ourselves, one another, and God. I don't think hell is a real place of
Okay.
punishment. I think we punish ourselves by not realizing how sacred we are, how connected with each other and the divine we are. That didn't always go down so well with some
No, I can't
Catholics.
imagine. No.
And I was always one of those Catholics who was also like, why do we have to go proselytize other people? Other religions are beautiful. I think Islam is beautiful. I think Hinduism is beautiful. I think Judaism is beautiful. And Catholics were like, yeah, no, only Jesus. And I was like, but why? you know? So there was a part of me that was always, and maybe that is the watery Pisces Cancer side, right? That's always been like, we're all connected. And that also is what always made me an abolitionist. I never believed in geopolitical borders. And I remember being told, like, oh, you're so naive. You're like a child and a teenager. What do you know about politics? Geopolitical borders are necessary. And I'm like, I'm 53 and I still believe in abolishing geopolitical colonial borders. I just have better arguments for it now than when I was like 13 years old, you know. But I think it's relevant to coming out because, in a way, it's this knowing deep inside that there is nothing wrong with me, right? In a way, God and religion has taught me that I am deeply lovable, right? Because I'm brought up in a home situation, even as a child, where there was domestic violence. And so for me, actually, the church, I was very lucky in that the church was a refuge, not a place of abuse, and home was a place of abuse, right? So the church and God, and especially Mary, you know, which is really big in southern Italy, the Black Madonna was like this representation of love, unconditional love, right? And so there was the seed of unconditional love in there. And I think when I'm sitting there at First Out in Tottenham Court Road, it kind of connects to this moment on the train in Italy as a teenager where there is this deep knowledge of like that we are all worthy of love, acceptance, and belonging. And anything that makes us not feel that way is not true, is not authentic. It's hateful, right? It's something else. It's oppression, it's hate, it's all these other things that we can experience, but that our authentic nature as being part of ecosystems is belonging, is diversity, is connection. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
I'm getting
But
very ethereal.
but so you're saying you're able to maintain that faith because that's just innate to you.
It just feels like it's in there. I don't know how,
Yeah.
but you know, in some way that has always been there. And I don't even know if I don't know if it is because I glommed onto spirituality as like my safe haven in a lot of ways from a very unsafe home situation, or if it's because ancestors. I don't know how that seed is there, right? But that seed is
And you
there.
don't even have to water it.
I mean, I don't know. I cry a lot, so I guess that's watering it. There was a lot of
Do you
crying,
cry a lot?
and not as much as I used to, but definitely cried numerous times a week. I definitely cried more when I was
Wow.
younger, and there was definitely a lot of crying in my coming out process, as I'm trying to make sense of all these feelings and with the real knowledge that I might lose my family when
Yeah.
I come out, which I did for some time. But also with this deep knowledge that I was never going to be ashamed. The kind of hiding or being ashamed of who I
Just not an
was not an
option.
option.
Oh, that's
That
interesting.
was not something I wanted.
Even with
Yeah.
this fear of being disowned or,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, wow.
I know. I remember even my mom was, I did not talk to my mom and did not go home for like a year after coming out because she did not react well at the time. And she said some awful things like, I don't know if I can love you, or if you have children, I don't know if I can love your children if they're born out of a queer relationship. And so I didn't go home for like a year, which was a big deal at the time. But that's the other piece. I think that being brought up in a more collectivist culture, I was a lot of the cultural influence was from my maternal grandmother, who was Sicilian. There was just something very strong in that one person cannot just cut you off. Like you belong to the community, you belong, like it's not optional, right? Like, so even the awful things that my mom said, there was a part of me that knew that those things were not okay. And so from the beginning I was like, it's acceptance or nothing. Like, this is not
Wow.
negotiable. This is not negotiable. This is not an argument. This is just who I am. Take it or leave it. And if you leave it, I guess you're not going to be part of my life. And I was very clear about that and always have
Wow.
been.
Very admirable.
Thank you. I don't know if it was admirable. It was just how I felt.
Yeah.
And it was scary. Like, I remember, I'm still sad about it when I think about it. And my mom and I have gone through a lot. And at the moment, we're going through another period of no contact for my own mental health. And I think that's part of kind of, I have a lot of compassion and I have a lot of understanding, but I also have a lot of clarity that shaming people or hating people or dehumanizing people in any way is not okay. That is not what we're here to do. That dehumanizing people is, no matter who does it or how we do it, it's part of oppression. It's not liberation, if
Yeah,
that
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
absolutely. But I think sometimes it's hard to hold on to that depending on how you're
Oh,
socialized or the stories you've been told. So
oh,
that's why I say
absolutely.
it's admirable that you're able to hold on and have that clarity despite everything else that's going on around you and in the world. Shall we go back to first out?
Absolutely. Let's do that.
So, what do you remember from that first visit? Did anyone talk to you? Did you hit on anyone, maybe?
I didn't talk to anybody. I do remember that. And I would go back to First Out many times. So then it became like a favorite safe place to be whenever I visited London, which was pretty frequently, probably almost every weekend, because I also really like going out dancing. And so nobody talked to me that first time. I didn't talk to anybody. I mean, apart from the
Yeah.
server when I ordered. But, I picked up because there were still magazines and free papers with all the ads and everything, right? And so I'm just immersing myself that first time. And then I would go back many times. And downstairs, they would have more like evening events, if I remember correctly. So I did kind of take courage and go to the evening events. And pretty sure First Out was the first bathroom where I might have made out or more in the bathroom.
Or more. Those bathrooms are tiny.
We were just, they are tiny, but you don't need a lot of space.
Ah.
So it was really very much part of my awakening, my sexual awakening in a lot of ways. One of my favorite stories. So this would have been a couple of years probably after I came out, 1 or 2 years. My mom was visiting, and we were in London because we would go to London to, see plays and shop and the things that people do when they go to London. And I was like, oh, let's go to First Out for lunch, and it's a gay cafe. My mom was like, yes, that's fine. And so I'm in there, and one of the servers is also Italian, which is so my mom is really excited because she can order in Italian. And then she's like looking at the free magazines, and it's like, how can you let your mother look at those? And my mom is like, I'm old enough. I know what bodies look like. It's okay. you know. But that was one of the sweet moments I remember. It felt like a safe place to take my mom to during the day, but also for her to have a little bit of exposure
Yeah,
to my world,
that extra
right?
insight.
And so that was a sweet moment of connection.
Aw.
Yeah.
And do you remember the last time you ever went to First Out?
Sadly not, because I didn't know that the last time would be the last time, right?
Yes,
Like
yeah.
just like any other relationships, you never know when it's the last kiss, the last time you have sex with somebody, the last time you go to
The last time you throw plates at them, yeah.
exactly. So you don't always know that that's the last time. So, but I do remember that because I moved to Turtle Island, the so-called United States, in 2008, but I would still go back to the UK pretty regularly because I still had a lot of professional ties. So I was going back at least once a year. And when in London, I would always go to First Out. And so probably the last time would have been 2009, 2010, because then I think it closed in 2011. But I do remember the first time I was in London, and I was like, oh, we should go for lunch at First Out. We're not far from Tottenham Court Road. And I remember arriving there, and there was a notice saying that the cafe had closed.
How did that feel?
Really sad. Like, even just saying that, I still remember the sadness. It just felt like the end of an era, right? It's just like, this was also the time where it just felt like queer community was really changing. There was so much more happening online, online dating and all of that. And yeah, I just remember this wave of like deep sadness. I think I was there with my oldest, who at the time would have been little, like 6 or 7, and Michael, my one of my nesting partners who I'm still with. And yeah, just really sad. Like, oh, I can't believe I'm crying. Like, I'm still feeling sad all these years later.
Can I pick up on something that you've just said then about the queer community changing? What exactly do you mean?
I feel that my coming out was full of places.
Yeah.
First Out is one of them, and then eventually I would go into the Wimford Arms in Reading, and I would spend time there. And the Granby, I think it was a lesbian bar that opened, right? Or even when I first moved to Turtle Island, going to Pie, which was the lesbian bar in Minneapolis, which is also no more. It was full of like places. You could go to a place, it was terrifying. Eventually people would talk to you, eventually you get to know them, you become a regular somewhere, and you have this feeling of physical community. There is literally somewhere you can go and just exist no matter if your hair is short or long, exist whether you read as queer or not, and just exist in peace, if that makes sense. And I feel like that has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Even when I used to travel for conferences and stuff, you could always find like, where's the gay bar? You go to the gay bar, you meet people, you can be relaxed, and more and more of those places have shut down
Yeah. Yeah.
as people find community through the internet. And there are lots of pluses, right? Like the internet has definitely been instrumental in us finding language for ourselves, finding community, especially if you're more isolated or more rural. I think it's wonderful what the internet has opened up in a lot of ways. But in other ways, there's almost this shift from physical in-person community to online community, which is different. And of course there is a time when there's both. In a way, when I was coming out, it was a little bit of both. There was some online, but there was still a lot of like physical space, events and club nights and bars and pubs and cafes and bookstores, right? And I feel like those opportunities have become fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer, and those spaces have become fewer and fewer and fewer, if that makes sense.
And is that sad because that means that no one will have the experience that you had? Oh, and so it's more of a nostalgia thing for you? Or is it sad because that's different and potentially better than meeting online?
I think it's a little bit of a both and. Definitely there's a nostalgia piece, of course, right? It's like a piece of your history is like gone in some ways, right? But there was also something about being in community physically with people, and not, of course, there are still kind of queer spaces, but being together online and across distance doesn't have quite the same feel as being physically in a space with other people, right? Even just going to a gay nightclub and just knowing that that's queer folks are the folks who are centered, and not that, none of those spaces were ideal. There was still racism, there was still transphobia, there was still misogyny, it was messy. I don't want to romanticize the past. It was very messy. And at the same time, there was something about building relationship in person that I think created community in a different way. Community was still much more local, whereas right now you can have people living in one place, but their communities everywhere, which can be beautiful and powerful, but it can also be very lonely. I talk, as a therapist, I also know that I talk to a lot of people who are like, I don't know how to make local friends. I don't know how to meet people. And unless you're in a place where there are queer spaces that are getting nurtured and cultivated, it's not so easy, right? Whereas I remember in the kind of late 90s when I came out, like I could go out dancing at a gay bar or a gay disco like every weekend if I wanted to, right? I didn't have to wait for a special like Pride event
Yeah.
or the once a month queer night at the local club or something, right? If I felt that loneliness, that not belonging, I love dancing. I could always just go dance and be with my people somewhere, right? And I don't think now is quite as easy or as immediate to connect in person physically with other queer folks. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. What it's made me think of is that, not even talking about queer community, just community in general, we've had centuries and centuries of people coming together, and now that's not happening. Or it is happening, but it's just happening in this different way. Yeah, I don't know. I'm such a fence sitter with this.
And me too.
Because I take all the points you've made. Like, there are so many people in rural areas, in countries where it's illegal to be yourself, that
Yes.
have access to people that, 50 years ago, they would not have had access. They would have had to just sit on this and slowly decay
Yeah.
inside. So that's wonderful. But yeah, this thing about existing in spaces with other people who are like you, but also in some ways might not be like you, and like negotiating that space and being in that space is really important. But I can't pinpoint why.
I think there is a certain amount of like needing to physically be in space and be able to like see and smell and sense each other, right? Like we are what is it, a troop species.
Yeah.
We're not lone wolves, right? And so, but with you, I'm like ambivalent because even though I'm in my 50s, I've always been an early adopter of technology. I'm one of those people that is like, you can put the internet in my brain, go for it. I'll be ready for the
I've already
microchip.
started hacking away at my skin. Yeah. Just
Exactly. I'm ready for my cyborg spine now that my spine doesn't work anymore. Like, bring the technology, right? I'm not an anti tech person at all. In fact, I love new technology. I've always been an early adopter. And it was very much a both and. Even when I was coming out, I was very excited that there was a Italian lesbian email list that I was on, for
oh.
example, and connected with a bunch of people. And there's something about having spaces for us to come together, to be together in our differences, to celebrate together, to cry together, to watch the Ellen coming out episode, on TV together, rather than do a watch party where we're all in our houses, right? There's something about this space, being able to go to a space that is also really valuable, I think.
Okay, so speaking of spaces, and one space in particular, First Out, what do you think that cafe taught you about yourself?
What a beautiful question. I think what was really special about First Out being a cafe, not a nightclub, not a pub, was that it didn't center like we have to go out and get plastered to accept ourselves and be with each other. I mean, I've done a lot of that too in my 20s, don't get me wrong. Way too much drinking and way too much poor behaviors in my late 20s for sure. But First Out was special because you could just go and get your cup of coffee and have lunch or have your work meeting. And there was something so normalizing about that, right? It's like I can be here in the full light of day, with my coffee and my quiche and my book, you know, and just be a human in a space where I know nobody's going to come at me in a certain way. And nobody's going to judge me for my hair being too short or, presenting in a way that's not conforming with gendered expectation. There was just like a settling that happened in my system in that place. And also, there were events, there was dancing, there was drinking also that happened in the evenings. But there was something about it being just a cafe like any other cafe that almost kind of underline the feeling of like we're just human who want to live our lives, and I don't want to go too much in the homonormative direction of like we're just like love is love. It's way more complicated than that, so I don't want to be naive. But there was something about the normalcy of a coffee shop versus like the closed doors, dark, we're all drinking, dancing, and also maybe not being quite as, in this kind of more protected space. First Out's front, it was like, it's windows, people can see you, that you're in there, right? It's not hidden. So there was something about the openness of it being a cafe that was unique at the time, at least where I lived, and where there was a feeling of you just go about your day and you also have a safe space to go have lunch while you go about your day in London.
Okay, let's go really cheesy now, right?
Let's do it.
You've jumped in a time machine. You've gone back to 1997. You walk into
Oh my
First Out
God.
Cafe. Spice Girls is playing on the radio, and I'm going to say it's Two Become One. And you see your younger self sitting in the corner with their quiche, with their coffee, gingerly looking around the cafe. You've got an opportunity to give them some advice. What would you say?
I'm going to get chalked up again. There was so much I didn't know at that time. I think I would definitely go join them, which would probably freak them out a little bit, and that's okay.
They did
I
that.
think, right? I think what I would say is that life has many more surprises than you expect, many more twists and turns than you expect. And the most important thing is to remember that, just to remember to stay alive, because it was also a time where, I've always lived with chronic suicidality since I was like probably 7 or 8 years old is the earliest I remember. So I think what I would say is that life is full of twists and turns and surprises, and there's going to be some rough time and some beautiful times. And the most important thing is to just never give up and know that even those times where it's like they're the darkest and you're going to feel the most unlovable and the most lonely, these times will pass too. None of that, like, right? It's, I love Octavia Butler and I love the parables of the sower, especially because of the old God is change, right? Her seed. And so I think I would just say, remember that Nothing stays the same forever. And even when you feel at your lowest, even when you feel at your loneliest, remember that you're not alone. Remember that you can always go somewhere with a book and get a cup of coffee, and you never know what happens next. Because after that first moment, all those years ago, that's like a whole life that I was able to build, a whole beautiful life full of a much larger family of choice that I could have ever imagined, a much more expansive love life that I could ever imagine, a much more expansive sexuality that I could have ever imagined, and a much more beautiful life than I could have ever imagined when I was 26. You know, when I first came out, I was probably much more of a love is love. We're just like you. I just want to find the love of my life and have some kids, right? And live a life like everybody else. Well, I didn't do that. I mean, I did get a lot of love, and I have a beautiful household with my nesting partners and kids, and but I didn't need to live just this like normative life that I thought I was heading for. I thought it was just going to be just as normative, but a lesbian, right? It would just be with a woman instead than with a man. And actually, queerness has expanded my life so beyond what I could ever imagine. And so I would say, just stay here for all of it. Even when you feel like you don't want to be here, hang on. Because, you know, everything is going to change anyway. And you can't even imagine how beautiful your life is going to be. And I'm not going to give you any spoilers because you got to live your life, but just make sure to stay here for it.
If you loved hearing Alex's story, then make sure you listen to their podcast, Gender Stories, and follow him on social media and let him know what you thought about his story. You can find him on Instagram at Xtaffi. So that's the letter X, Taffi. Cool. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod, and I would love to hear from you. Right, that's it from me. As always, if you have the time or the inclination, please make sure you subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, or just tell another person who you think might get a kick out of this episode that it exists and that they should put it in their earbuds. Right, my name's Kay Anderson, and this is Lost Spaces. See you for now.